We're going to be having a discussion about the inner caretaker. So this really important protective part in IFS is the one who feels responsible for other people. So I'll be sharing some insights around this really important protector, and we'll also be discussing how this is connected to sensitivity, empathy, and neurodivergence. And then at the end of the call today, I'll be leading you through a guided meditation to get to know this really important, hardworking, protective part. Just know that questions and comments are always welcome. You can share them in the chat or come on video or unmute yourself, whatever you're comfortable with. And so in the last call, we were speaking about the inner people pleaser. And I see this caretaking protector and their inner people pleaser as being closely related. It's almost like they're siblings or cousins. And so, I shared in the last call, I was a little bit in denial about my people-pleasing tendencies for quite a while. I had the same response when I first heard about this caretaking protector in the IFS model. So when I hear the word caretaking or caregiving, what was coming up for me in the past was this idea that you're sitting at someone's bedside and helping them to be more comfortable. And that may be a part of caretaking for some people, but that wasn't something that I really resonated with. But the way that I understand the burden of this caregiving or caretaking protector has really changed and evolved over time. And so I'm going to be sharing more about that, but I thought I might begin with sharing a story. It feels a little bit vulnerable. Honestly, this is something that I used to have a lot of shame around. But I feel like, yeah, it feels like I want to share this today as reclaiming my sensitivity has been an important part of my healing journey and continues to be. Speaking about that publicly and helping people understand how their sensitivity, while it can pose challenges, can also be a real gift. So back when I was in residency, so that's the final part of your training to become a psychiatrist, it was a really difficult period of time in my life. There's really long training hours, there's steep learning curves. I had some challenges going on in my personal life, and I didn't exactly see eye to eye with some of the other psychiatrists I was training with. And I have this memory of an interaction I had with one of these psychiatrists towards the end of my training. And I remember him telling me that I was going to end up being one of those doctors who basically just cared too much, that took my work home with me, that got overwhelmed by my emotions, that burnt out. Yeah, I still kind of feel the tenderness around that, just remembering that story. I was really saw myself as a high achiever. I have a really strong high achieving protective part. And at the time, I think, like many people in our culture, I thought that sensitivity was weakness. And so I was really mortified by this conversation. I was really determined to prove him wrong. And so essentially, this led me to really put my sensitivity into exile, even more into exile than it already was. Because what I heard from him, some of the things he didn't exactly put into words, but what I was hearing, what I was sensing was, you're too sensitive. You're too emotional. You care too much. You don't have healthy emotional boundaries. And so there is a lot of judgment in our culture towards sensitive people. And I think a lot of people see sensitivity and empathy as something that's almost a character defect, something that needs to be suppressed or compartmentalized. And that was the way that I approached it. But I wonder what the cost is of suppressing your sensitivity, of suppressing your big emotions. And what is really the cost of suppressing an aspect of your true authentic nature? And to me, that's really a central component of the healing journey is learning to reclaim our true nature, to discovering our true selves. Because through this process of social conditioning, we've really learned to exile the parts of us that others haven't deemed as acceptable. And IFS provides a really supportive process for doing this because IFS is all about restoring wholeness, retrieving those exiled parts of you, learning to have love and compassion for your exiles and for your protectors. So I think it's fair to say that our culture does hold a lot of negative judgments about sensitivity. But in the last few years, after some years of working with IFS personally, I really started to accept, to recognize that I am really sensitive and that maybe part of that is my wiring. Because I find that the more burdens that I release and the more that my protectors relax, the more sensitive I realize that I am. And I think this is an important aspect of the healing journey for many neurodivergent people. It's something that we maybe don't talk about enough is what happens when you're healing and you become more sensitive. And that was a question that I was asking myself, like this sensitivity or this healing, this IFS work, all of the other healing practices that I do, they're making me really sensitive, so sensitive that it's sometimes hard to manage day-to-day life because I'm just feeling everything. And something that I've had to continuously come back to is the fact that it's not making me more sensitive. I am just connecting with my own true nature, and that sensitivity was always there, but I was disconnected from it. I was really disconnected from my body. So I've learned to see trauma as a process of disconnection. It disconnects us from our authentic nature, from our body, from other people, from the world around us. And some of the IFS conferences I've attended have really been helpful in my learning to embrace my sensitivity and neurodivergence. So a few years ago, I attended a workshop on the highly sensitive person. So this is a concept that has been researched extensively by a person named Elaine Aron. And what she's found is that about 15 to 20% of the population have this high sensitivity trait. And I think it's important to define what's meant by this too, because when people say sensitive, they mean different things. They might be talking about rejection sensitivity, they might be talking about being offended. So when I use this term, highly sensitive person, the sensitivity trait, or sensory processing sensitivity, it's often called as well. What I mean is that a person is more aware of and responsive to their environment. And I see that as being a really important distinction and something that can help us to understand why sensitive people are more prone to internalizing trauma. You're more aware of and responsive to your environment. That's not a way that I had thought about sensitivity in the past. And so learning about the neurodiversity paradigm has been really helpful for me as well. So an aspect of the neurodiversity paradigm, the central aspect, from what I understand, is that there is no one right type of nervous system. There's no one right way of perceiving or experiencing the world. That there's a wide range of types of neurological functioning, and one isn't better or best compared to others. That everyone is unique and different, and that all ways of experiencing the world are valid. So people are all born with different types of nervous systems, with a different with a different neurotype. Some of us more sensitive than others. And I believe that people have evolved to be sensitive. I mean, being more responsive to and aware of your environment has evolutionary advantages. So we did evolve to live in this world. I often hear people say that this world wasn't designed for you, for sensitive or neurodivergent people. And I like to just change the language of that a little bit because this world is very much for us, for you, but our society isn't set up in a way that is conducive to the healthy thriving of sensitive and neurodivergent people. Our beliefs and values, the beliefs and values in our society really cause us to reject this sensitivity in the interest of logic, in the interest of productivity, in the interest of being more compartmentalized from your emotions so that you can function at a higher level, so that you can earn a greater income, so that you can serve the economy. So these are part of the values of our capitalist society, which is, I think, one of the reasons why our culture holds such a negative view towards sensitive and neurodivergent people who might tend to thrive in working in less traditional ways often. That we have really unique skills, really unique abilities, but that, working in a traditional 9 to 5 job or even longer hours than that might not be something that supports your healthy thriving. And so, how does this all connect to trauma and to this caretaking protector? So, the way that I've come to understand this caretaking protector is that the central burden is feeling responsible for other people. So, if someone else is in pain, if they're in emotional pain, if they're sick, you feel responsible for them, that you're responsible for their healing, for their wellness. And then on the other side of that, if they're not doing well, so especially, I think that a lot of sensitive people with a strong caretaking protector, people pleasing protector end up in helping professions. And we're very caring and sensitive. We want to help people feel better. But this is where the challenges with those emotional boundaries can come in when you really feel that that person's healing is your responsibility, that that person's emotions are your responsibility. And those beliefs, they might be unconscious, but you can probably feel them because they might be compelling you to work really long hours, to sacrifice your own needs, to sacrifice your own well being, which, by the way, was something that was really pushed in medical school, whether or not it was said directly. And we work really long hours, we learn to suppress our own needs. That's part of Western culture, that's part of medical culture. But then you get criticized for not having better boundaries that no one actually taught you. And what I think a lot of people don't realize is that challenges with emotional boundaries really stems from developmental trauma. I hear a lot of people say too, I had a happy childhood, I didn't have any trauma. And first I want to say that having childhood or developmental trauma, early relational trauma, attachment trauma doesn't mean that you didn't also have a happy childhood. It's possible that your physical needs were being met, but that there's a lack of emotional attunement. So we often talk about trauma as the things that shouldn't have happened that did, things like abuse, other adverse childhood events, parental separation, loss. But there's also the things that should have happened that didn't. And for highly sensitive and neurodivergent people, that emotional attunement is really important. It's really important for everyone, but especially for those of us that have big emotions, because attunement is how you learn to regulate. Someone is showing you by attuning to you that you're safe. They're feeling calm. They're helping you to access your calm. Or in IFS terms, they're embodying self energy and they're helping you to connect with your self energy. And that to me is the core essence of regulation. I kind of sense this bias in our culture that emotional regulation is something that's done with the mind. And certainly you can, have a more logical thought process as you get older and your prefrontal cortex develops. But when you think about young children, they literally don't have the brain development to regulate through the mind. So actually the core of emotional regulation to me is more about attunement. And that's something that first needs to come from the outside to be able to do on the inside with ourselves, to attune to and be present with our own emotions, our own pain. And that's something I think very few people really learn as children, how to be present with your own pain. And that's really what IFS therapy is teaching us, is to stop pushing our pain away, and to greet anything that arises within us with curiosity and compassion, because you deserve that. And those big feelings, that pain and sadness and loneliness and fear, shame and anxiety and guilt, they're often those exiled parts of you that are getting further rejected when we can't turn towards them. And that's nothing to be ashamed of or to judge yourself for. It's something that I've certainly had to learn in IFS therapy, which has been incredibly helpful for me. And it's really a paradigm shift within the mental health field and within our culture to not ignore, distract, suppress, repress, push away our pain, but to actually embrace it. And so, coming back to this concept of sensitivity, sensitive people have bigger feelings. That's part of the package. We have these really big, deep feelings. And so, um, if you haven't learned, if you haven't experienced that attunement and you don't know how to attune, I actually like the term attune better than regulate, because I feel like regulation carries that bias of using the mind to sort of overcome your emotions or suppress them. But if we haven't learned how to attune to ourselves, when big emotions come up, we don't know what to do and we panic and they get kind of stuck inside of us. And so IFS helps us to connect with those emotions and allow them to flow again. I don't know if you've ever heard people say that emotions are energy in motion. So we want our emotions to be flowing, and they can't flow if we can't feel them, and we can't be open to them. But when you're sensitive and you feel things deeply, that can be really hard. And so I believe this is why sensitive and neurodivergent people are more prone to internalizing trauma, because not only are you feeling things more deeply, so you're more likely to be overwhelmed by your emotions, which is part of how trauma is internalized when your system is overwhelmed and they get stuck. But also you're more aware of and responsive to your environment. So there could be things that are easy to minimize, like there could be conflict within the home, tension. There could be a person experiencing mental health challenges or addiction challenges. And the more sensitive you are, the more you feel that. So talking about empathy, or hyper empathy. I heard that term in the neurodivergent world. And as soon as I heard it, I said, oh, I've definitely got that. I feel what other people are feeling in my own body, and it's painful. And studies that have been done on empathy show that it actually does light up the pain circuitry in your brain. So you literally are feeling other people's pain. And then we contrast that with compassion, which is one of the 8 C's of self energy in the IFS model. So we see compassion as feeling for, so you can be present with your own pain or someone else's pain, or any part of you for that matter, without taking on the pain. But that empathic resonance, it's really like a sensitivity to people's emotions. And when someone's in pain, you feel that. So it's only natural that you want to make that person feel better. And this is coming back to that people pleasing part too. How closely related it is to its cousin or sibling, this caretaking protector. It's a natural response to want to please people who are in pain, to try to keep the peace. But this caretaking part may take different forms. Maybe there is that really wanting to attend to people's needs and make them feel more comfortable so that they feel better, so that you can feel better. Because when you're little, seeing that your caregivers aren't okay or in pain makes you feel like your survival is at risk. Whether or not it objectively is, the important thing is that your parts as a child are experiencing a survival threat, what feels like a survival threat. And when you're little, you're really pretty helpless. When you're sensitive and you're feeling that pain or you're sensing into that conflict and the people around you, that can be really scary and overwhelming. So these burdens of fear can be taken on, or shame. Maybe you're blaming yourself. Kids tend to blame themselves for everything. They have an internal locus of control. So it's like, it's my fault they're unhappy, or they're arguing because of me. They're in pain because of me. I have to do better. I'm going to take responsibility for them. And that's really how this caretaking protector comes online. And I've found for a lot of people that this happens, like people pleasing happens really early. It could be 2 or 3 years old, that you're attuning to people's pain and feeling responsible for them and trying to do things to make them feel better. So that could be things like trying to take care of them, bringing them things. We talk about the parentified child. That's really managers in IFS, those protective parts who want to be in control of the world around them and control of the inner world. So these managers are the parentified children. And sometimes this is because you grew up in a situation where you literally did have to take care of yourself from a really young age. And I meet a lot of people, sadly, who were in that situation. But sometimes it can be the perception of needing to care for yourself and others. And it might be more about the emotional aspect than actual physical needs. And I think that's something that's often overlooked, but really important. So I see that progression as this sensitivity and empathy, feeling other people's pain, taking responsibility for them, especially in the absence of getting really clear messages that it isn't your responsibility to please or take care of others, because that behavior might be reinforced by people around you as a kid, might be reinforced in school, it might be reinforced in your training to take care of others and be responsible for others. I mean, as a psychiatrist, I was literally taught that part of my responsibilities are to prevent people from dying. There are responsibilities to keep people safe. And that was a really scary, overwhelming burden for my protective parts that were already feeling overly responsible. So some of these manager parts, the people pleaser, the inner caretaker, because they feel responsible for others, that can make boundaries really hard. If you're feeling someone in pain, you want to help them, and it becomes these parts become compelled, and it can feel like you don't have any choice. So you might get curious about how this dynamic shows up in your life, if it's something that you relate to. Where in your life do you feel responsible for others? Where are you having trouble setting boundaries, saying no? Where do you feel like it's your fault if someone isn't doing well or is having a hard time or isn't healing as quickly as everyone would like? Where do you feel like you might be feeling if you're not healing as quickly as you'd like? I think, anyone on a healing journey can relate to the idea of like wanting to be healed yesterday. This takes a lot longer than um, we might like or want it to. It's often, I think about when someone has broken a bone or had a physical injury. You can say, okay, this is likely to, be healed in 6 to 8 weeks. But when you're healing trauma, it's just so much more complicated than that. especially when partway through that healing journey, you discovered that you're highly sensitive, highly empathic, neurodivergent, and that just adds a whole nother layer of complexity. But it's important because part of healing is reconnecting with our true authentic nature. And it's not easy, especially for us sensitive folks. Yeah, so I think we will head into the meditation soon, but just making a little bit of space too if there's any questions or comments. And there's one last concept I wanted to talk about here before we move into the meditation. So we've been talking about empathy as sort of a resonance with other people's pain. So someone else is in emotional pain, you're feeling their pain, and you can actually see that in imaging studies that it lights up that pain circuitry in your brain. But the other thing that I've been noticing, both in my own IFS work and in some of the people that I support, is that these empathic parts can actually take on other people's pain. And so this is one of the actually the earliest strategies that I've seen empathic parts, or you might consider this that overly responsible part, before there's really actions that are available to help people, to support them, to make them feel better, to take care of them. There's actually an internalizing of their pain and that pain energy and holding it in your body. And I can feel there's a part of me that is like hesitant to talk about this and just noticing that this really bumps up against that materialist paradigm. Um, Materialism being the worldview that only the physical, the material world is real. So essentially means that consciousness isn't real. I don't work from that paradigm. It doesn't align with IFS. It doesn't align with my worldview, but it is part of our dominant culture, certainly in the medical field. But I find that while, thinking about and considering biology is an important aspect of healing, taking time to consider our energy and our parts, that's important too. And if you're on this call or listening to this replay, I imagine it's important to you too. I just want you to know that if you have a skeptical part, those parts are very welcome. Yeah, and just to acknowledge that has been my experience that empathic parts, when you follow this caretaking protector, that sometimes they have taken on people's energy. And I'm very fortunate to have a sensitive therapist myself who had this on her radar because this comes up in my own IFS work periodically. I'm just thinking of another example, even outside of IFS. I was doing a guided meditation session with my mentor David, and we were working on this. I was really struggling, especially last summer, with having a really hard time being around people when they were in intense pain. I was getting overwhelmed. And we tracked this back to an event that occurred early in my childhood when someone that I was really close with lost a parent. And when this came up in this healing meditative process, I had actually completely forgotten about this. But it really made sense to me that if I had, a little friend who was in this huge emotional pain, that was one of the major events that happened in my past when I started learning to take on other people's pain. And of course, if you're in a helping profession and working with people in pain, that's something that can really accumulate over time. So not only are there these emotional boundaries that we're all trying to learn, there's also the energetic boundary aspect of that, which is really a growing edge for me and something that I feel passionately about helping other sensitive and neurodivergent people learn. Because it's not something that we learned growing up, but it's really important, both those emotional and energetic boundaries. And a piece of that can be starting to notice when and if you are taking on other people's pain. So, as we prepare to shift into the meditation, we'll be starting with this part that feels responsible for others. and coming into relationship with it as we do in IFS meditations. And then we'll have the opportunity to ask too if this part or an empathic part is holding on to any pain and having the opportunity to release that. So I think in the interest of time, we will start to shift unless there's any questions. You can go ahead and start to get comfortable. Begin to shift your attention inward. And just taking a few moments here to transition. We've been in talking intellectual mode. So you may have learning parts active. And just noticing if there's any part of you that feels like you have to try really hard, figure something out, or really get it right. And if so, just ask that part if it's willing to allow you a bit of space to be more present, to be open and curious. And see if you can lean into a little bit more of that curiosity. And you might take a couple of deep breaths. You might remember that tree trunk that's connecting you to the earth. And from that more grounded, open, curious place, see if you can welcome this part of you that feels responsible for others. That might be wanting to make them feel better, take care of them, preventing anything bad from happening. And however that feeling of responsibility shows up for you, just notice it. We want to bring this attitude of curiosity, almost like you're seeing it for the first time or seeing it through the eyes of a child. Noticing where you feel this part in or around your body. And what do you notice about it? Does it feel heavy? Does it have a texture or an energetic quality? Noticing if there's an image that goes along with it, a color, a shape. Notice if there's an emotion that's connected to it. It might be anxiety, guilt, or something else. Whatever you notice, see if you can really welcome this part with openness. You can let it know that you'd like to get to know it a little better, that you really want to understand it at the deepest level. You could ask this part, what do you want me to know? How are you trying to help me? And how long have you been doing this for? Or how old were you when you started doing this job? Do you like doing this? Do you ever get a break? I'm just looking for opportunities to really extend some appreciation to this part for how hard it's been working. This strategy might contribute to some present day challenges for you, but really looking for that positive intention in this protector strategy. And if it's possible, sending some thanks for how hard it's been working on your behalf, trying to keep you safe, to keep your exiles safe. And noticing what it's like for this part to interact with you in this way, to have your attention and to be appreciated. What it like to continue to have this relationship with you, to develop it, to feel connected. You could ask this part how it would like to be supported by you. And you could also ask, what are you afraid would happen if you didn't do this job? What are you afraid of feeling? What are you afraid might happen to the people around you? And just take a moment to Really acknowledge that fear and how big that is. You can reassure this part that we're not going to ask for it to give up its job. But maybe it would like to feel connected to and supported by you, so it didn't have to work quite so hard. And that's a relationship that takes time to develop. You could also ask this one, what is it like for you when you're with someone who's in pain? What happens inside of you when you're with someone who's in pain? And where do you feel that in your body? And as you notice that lighting up in your body, I invite you to imagine or visualize a scale out in front of you. It might be a gauge, a thermometer, a pie chart. And you can ask the question, what percentage of this pain doesn't belong to you? And just notice what number pops into your head or what you see in that scale. It might be a little, it might be a lot. You might be surprised by how much of other people's pain you're carrying. The part may show you whose pain it's been holding on to, or maybe not. You don't necessarily need to know. But you could ask this part, would you like to let go of this pain that you've been carrying that doesn't belong to you? 'Cause you actually can't heal it. If you're carrying someone else's pain, that could be preventing them from healing it. It isn't your responsibility. And if there are any other fears or concerns about releasing it, see if you can address them. It's not going to hurt anyone else to release this out of your system. It's just kind of stuck there. And if there is a willingness to release this, you could ask your part how it would like to do that. You might offer the elements, earth, air, fire, water, asking them to work with you, or any other way that you can imagine. When you feel ready, you can invite your part to release the energy of this pain into one of the elements. And just notice, feel, or watch that leaving your body. Great. Just taking your time with this process. It's possible that pain has been in there for a long time. And just checking your whole body to make sure that's been released. You might even have another look at that scale or gauge and see if it's going down. And if it doesn't go down all the way to zero, that's okay. And see if you can release whatever is ready to go today, whatever isn't serving you. And when that feels complete, you can release that scale too. And then ask this part what new qualities it would like to call in, or any old ones it would like to reconnect with. And go ahead and invite those qualities into your body. Just breathe them into all of your cells. Beautiful. When that feels complete, you can thank your part for trusting you. If it feels right, you might let it know you're going to come back and check in again another time. And we'll be sharing this video on YouTube, so you can always go back and do this meditation again, or sit with yourself in meditation and check in with this really hardworking part to develop that relationship over time. And just like relationships in the outer world, developing relationships with our parts takes time to build up trust and connection. And you can take a few deep breaths and gradually bring yourself back to the space around you.